These are the 8 richest families that own Kentucky, and their influence on the state's economy runs deeper than you'd expect. We're talking about a family head worth $8.5 billion, making her entire fortune off strangers' junk. But that's nothing next to a man who made $1 billion selling cigarettes and has never smoked one. And at number 1, you will see a family hiding a whiskey fortune inside 113 trusts. Let's get into it. Number 8. The Bingham family. Let's kick things off with a story of a body being dug back out of the ground. In 1916, a Louisville lawyer named Robert Worth Bingham married one of the wealthiest women in America, a widow called Mary Lily Keenan Flagler, and 8 months later she was dead. Her family did not take this well because they were convinced she'd been poisoned, so they contested the will and they had her body exhumed for an autopsy, and the results of that autopsy were never made public. Nobody has ever definitively proved anything. What we do know is that in 1918, Robert Worth Bingham collected his inheritance, took $1 million of it, and bought himself a controlling interest in the Louisville Courier-Journal. And that is how the Binghams came to own Kentucky. Not a piece of it. The whole conversation. Because over the next 70 years, this one family controlled the Courier-Journal, the Louisville Times, WHAS television, and WHAS radio. If you lived in this state and you wanted to know what was happening in it, the answer came to you through a Bingham. The Courier-Journal was genuinely one of the finest newspapers in America, and it collected Pulitzers like other papers collect complaints. Robert Bingham bankrolled Franklin Roosevelt, got himself appointed ambassador to Britain in 1933, and when he was done, the man they sent to replace him was Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., which means one doomed American dynasty literally handed the job to another. So how does an empire like that end? It ends badly, and it ends in public. By the mid-80s, the 3 surviving children of patriarch Barry Bingham Sr. were at war with each other. His daughter Sally had watched the women in her family get quietly frozen out of the company boards for years, and she'd had enough, so she put her stock up for sale. That was the match. And rather than watch his children tear the thing apart, Barry Sr. did something nobody expected, which was to sell all of it, everything, to Gannett, the chain that gave the world USA Today. The family walked away with about $300 million, split 4 ways. Reporters flew in from all over America to watch a great newspaper family destroy itself, and one of them won a Pulitzer just for writing about the collapse. Sally left Kentucky for New Mexico in 1991 and never really came back, and when she died in 2025 at 88, the family was still in federal court. They got 3 generations, and their funeral won a Pulitzer. About 70 miles east of Louisville, there is another family that has held onto the same patch of ground for 116 years, and the most famous thing they own is buried in it. Number 7. The Hancock family. Every single year, roughly 12,000 people drive out to a small town called Paris, Kentucky, walk past the barns of a working horse farm, and stand quietly in front of a grave. The grave belongs to Secretariat, and the farm belongs to the Hancocks, who have owned it since 1910. 4 generations. Same family, same 3,000 acres of Bourbon County, and if you want to understand what it actually means to own Kentucky, it is not a mansion in Louisville, it's this. 50 barns, 30 houses, 500 horses, and 100 miles of white plank fencing, all of it running on a motto handed down by Bull Hancock, who used to say the whole trick was doing the usual, unusually well. The numbers coming out of that farm are frankly absurd. More than 80 champions born there. Claiborne stallions have led the North American sire list 29 separate times, including a 15-year run where basically nobody else got a look in. 6 of the 13 Triple Crown winners in history were sired by a horse standing on that property. But the story that defines this family happened in 1972, when Bull Hancock died suddenly, and the entire operation landed on his son Seth, who was 23 years old. 23. And in his first year running it, Seth made the single riskiest bet in the history of American horse racing. Penny Chenery had a colt named Secretariat and a tax bill she couldn't pay, so she came to this 23-year-old and asked him to syndicate the horse. Seth put together a deal worth $6.08 million, which was a world record at the time, and he did it before Secretariat had won a thing. No Triple Crown, no Belmont, just a very fast horse and a kid's instinct. Then the horse went out and turned in the greatest performance any thoroughbred has ever produced, and came home to Claiborne to stand at stud, exactly as agreed. When Secretariat died in 1989, tradition said you bury the head, the heart, and the hooves. The Hancocks buried him whole, in a casket lined with yellow silk, which is Claiborne's racing color. Then they left the gate open so anybody could come and see him. Today, Walker Hancock runs the place, fourth generation, and their stallion Warfront commands $100,000 for a single covering. That is what 116 years of quiet, patient competence buys you. But if you don't happen to have a century lying around, there is a much faster route into the Kentucky aristocracy, and it involves Standard Oil money and the Queen of England. Speaking of what that kind of quiet, patient thinking can compound into, there's a program someone on our team has been curious about called the Billionaire Brain Wave. It's a simple 7-minute audio built around theta brainwave research, the deep focus brain state linked to where big creative ideas come from. You put on headphones once a day, usually with your morning coffee, and that's the whole routine. It's a one-time $39. It comes with bonus guides on money habits and investing basics, and there's a 90-day money-back guarantee. So testing it costs you nothing if it's not for you. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera, or tap the first link in the description. Now, back to number 6, and the most surprising overnight visitor on this entire list. Number 6. The Farish family. Somewhere in Versailles, Kentucky, there is a guest bedroom, and Queen Elizabeth II slept in it. Repeatedly, not a hotel. Not an embassy. A farmhouse in Woodford County belonging to a man named Will Farish, who the Queen liked so much that she came to Kentucky 5 separate times, and every time she stayed at his place, and the two of them would go out touring stallions together like a pair of retirees at a car show. So who exactly is this guy? He is the grandson of William Stamps, Farish II, who ran Standard Oil of New Jersey, which means the money is old, it's enormous, and it isn't Kentucky money at all. It's Texas oil that moved to the bluegrass and made itself at home. And along the way, his firm was trusted to manage George H.W. Bush's blind trust, which is not a job you hand to a stranger. In 1979, he bought 240 acres in Versailles and called it Lane's End. And today, it's over 2,300 acres and one of the finest thoroughbred operations on the planet. He has bred more than 300 stakes winners. In 1999, he became the first breeder since 1880 to breed horses that won all 3 legs of the Triple Crown in a single season. Now you want to know how much money is actually in a farm like that? Lane's End stands a stallion called Flightline, and the fee to breed 1 mare to him is $150,000. A good stallion covers well over 100 mares in a season. Sit with that for a moment, because it means one horse, standing in one barn, doing what horses do, generates north of $15 million a year. And here's where the whole owning Kentucky thing stops being a figure of speech, because from 1992 to 2001, Will Farish was the chairman of the board of Churchill Downs. He ran the Kentucky Derby. Then in 2001, George W. Bush made him the United States ambassador to the United Kingdom. So the man who hosted the Queen in Kentucky got sent over to represent America to her in London. My favorite detail about him, though, has nothing to do with any of that. Farish designed the fences at Lane's End himself, and he insisted they be built with rounded corners. No sharp angles anywhere on the property, because a horse that gets itself trapped in a corner can hurt itself trying to get out. The man spent a fortune making sure his horses could never back themselves into a wall. 2 hours southeast of all that bluegrass, the ground turns black, and the money down there does not whisper. Number 5. The Kraft family. Here's a question. What does it actually take to own a state? Because Joe Kraft has, as far as I can tell, worked out the exact answer, and it comes in 3 parts. Part 1 is coal. Kraft is a lawyer's son from Hazard, Kentucky, right in the heart of coal country, and he took an accounting degree and then a law degree from the University of Kentucky before joining a coal company as an assistant general counsel. That is about as unglamorous an entry point as exists. He worked his way up to president, and then in 1996 he led a management buyout of the whole coal division and was handed an enormous stake as his reward. And that company became Alliance Resource Partners, now one of the biggest coal producers in the eastern United States, with mining complexes running through Kentucky, Illinois, Indiana, West Virginia, and Maryland. He hit the Forbes 400 in 2010 with $1.4 billion. Then in 2011, a divorce settlement split his shareholdings with his ex-wife and cost him roughly $500 million in one go, and he fell straight off the list. He has been rebuilding ever since, and he's back in the neighborhood of $1 billion. Though with Cole, the number moves around a lot depending on the year you ask. Part 2 is basketball, and this is where it gets clever. Kraft put up the money to finish the University of Kentucky's basketball practice facility, and they named it after him. It is called the Joe Kraft Center. Now, if you are not from Kentucky, you might be hearing that as a building. It is not a building. In this state, Kentucky basketball is closer to a religion, and Joe Kraft's name is carved above the door of the place where they train. Part 3 is politics, and the Lexington Herald leader once described him as sitting at the exact nexus of Kentucky coal, Kentucky basketball, and Kentucky politics, which is a hell of a sentence to have written about you. He's poured hundreds of thousands into candidates and PACs over the years, and his wife, Kelly Kraft, served as the United States ambassador to Canada and then as the United States ambassador to the United Nations. So he digs up the thing the state was built on. His name is on its most sacred building, and his wife represents the country at the UN. That is not influence. That's a controlling interest. Meanwhile, over in Louisville, another man was quietly assembling $1 billion of his own, and he got started by taking orders at a Wendy's drive-thru window. Number 4. The Bridgman family. Picture a professional basketball player in the off-season, working the lunch rush at a Wendy's. Not as the owner dropping in to shake hands. On the till. Taking orders through a headset. That was Junior Bridgman, and he did it on purpose because he had figured out something that almost nobody else in the league had. Bridgman was the son of a steel mill worker. He starred at the University of Louisville, and in 1975 the Lakers drafted him 8th overall and then immediately traded him to Milwaukee in the deal that sent Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to Los Angeles. So he spent 12 seasons as one of the finest sixth men in basketball, and in his entire career, he never earned more than $350,000 in a single season. That was the era. The money simply wasn't there yet, which is why he was standing at that drive-thru window. He wanted to learn the restaurant business from the inside, so he went and did the actual job. And his first franchise, a Wendy's in Brooklyn he bought with Paul Silas, was a disaster that struggled badly, and then, I'm not making this up, burned down in a fire. Silas walked away from it. Bridgman rebuilt it on his own. From there, he just kept going, until at his peak, he owned more than 500 restaurants across the country. And then, in 2016, he sold nearly all of them for around $250 million and used the money to become a Coca-Cola bottler, which sounds boring right up until you learn that Heartland Coca-Cola's revenue tripled to nearly $1 billion a year. In 2020, he bought Ebony and Jet magazines out of bankruptcy for $14 million and saved two of the most important publications in Black American history. And in 2024, he bought a 10% stake in the Milwaukee Bucks at a $4 billion valuation, which means the man who got traded away as a rookie came back and bought the team. Forbes put him at $1.4 billion. He was married to his college sweetheart Doris for 50 years, and all three of their children have MBAs and run the businesses now. Eden runs Ebony. Ryan runs the restaurant group. Justin is the CEO of the Coca-Cola Company. Junior Bridgman died in March of 2025 at 71 of a heart attack while he was speaking at a fundraising luncheon in Louisville. 1,200 people came to say goodbye, and he's buried at Cave Hill. He built his empire on something he genuinely loved. About 2 hours south of him, another man built a bigger one on a product he has never touched in his life and openly hopes gets wiped off the face of the earth. Number 3. The Kelly family. Brad Kelly made $1 billion selling cigarettes, and he has never smoked one. Not a single one, ever. And he'll tell you quite happily that he hopes smoking eventually gets phased out of society altogether. He also does not use email. At all. In the year 2026. Kelly grew up on a tobacco farm in Simpson County, Kentucky, and he bought his first piece of land when he was 17 years old and his first warehouse at 20, which tells you exactly the kind of teenager he was. He dropped out of Western Kentucky University because business was more interesting. And when tobacco production collapsed in the 80s and Kentucky filled up with empty warehouses that nobody wanted, he bought them cheap and leased them back out. And somewhere in there, he decided the smarter move was to skip the middleman entirely and just make the cigarettes himself. So in 1991, he founded Commonwealth Brands in Bowling Green, selling discount cigarettes under names like USA Gold and Malibu, and 10 years later, he sold the whole thing for $1 billion. Then he did the most Brad Kelly thing imaginable, which was to take that $1 billion and start buying land. Not a nice house. Land. He became one of the largest private landowners in the entire United States, over 1 million acres spread across Texas, Florida, New Mexico, and Hawaii. He bought Lonely Planet from the BBC. He became the largest shareholder in Churchill Downs, which means for a while the man who owned the biggest chunk of the Kentucky Derby was a cigarette manufacturer who doesn't smoke. And then in 2012, he came home and bought Calumet Farm. If you don't follow racing, understand that Calumet is not just a horse farm. It is the most storied name in the entire sport, the operation that produced 8 Kentucky Derby winners in its prime, and by the time Kelly got to it, it had been drifting for decades. He put it back together. His colt Oxbow won the Preakness in 2013, and in 2019, Calumet topped all North American breeders by earnings and broke a record that had stood for 57 years. Depending on which source you trust, he's worth somewhere between $1.5 and $2.5 billion. He gives almost no interviews. He funds a wildlife center in Florida full of rhinos and tapirs, and as a teenager, he was named Kentucky's High School Conservationist of the Year, which is a genuinely strange thing to find on the resume of a man who got rich selling cigarettes. At least Kelly gets talked about. The richest person in the entire state of Kentucky is a woman that most Kentuckians could not pick out of a lineup, and her fortune came from something even weirder than tobacco. Number 2. The Hughes and Gustafson family. Her name is Tamara Gustafson. She lives in Lexington. Forbes put her at $8.5 billion in 2026, which makes her the 412th richest person on the planet and, comfortably, the richest person in the state of Kentucky. And I'd bet almost nobody watching this has ever heard of her. So where did it all come from? Storage units. Her father, B. Wayne Hughes, co-founded Public Storage back in 1972. Those big boxy buildings with the bright orange roll-up doors that you have driven past 1,000 times just off the highway exit. The ones full of a nation's exercise bikes and Christmas decorations and boxes of stuff nobody has opened in 15 years. That's it. That's the fortune. The richest family in Kentucky got that way holding on to everything Americans couldn't fit in their own houses, and Tamara owns about 10% of the company. Her brother is separately a billionaire and lives in Wyoming. But this is a Kentucky list, so here's the Kentucky part, and it's a good one. In 2004, Wayne Hughes bought Spendthrift Farm in Lexington. He was a Californian, and he told a reporter afterwards that buying it made him feel like he was finally part of Kentucky, which is an oddly touching thing for a self-storage billionaire to say out loud. And Spendthrift is not a hobby farm. 10 Kentucky Derby winners have come out of that place. The Triple Crown, Champions, Seattle Slew, and Affirmed both stood there. Nashua and Ray's, a native and majestic prince, are buried in the ground. It's over 1,000 acres with more than 60 miles of fencing, roughly the size of 750 football fields, and Forbes valued the whole operation at $400 million, with the horses alone making up about $360 million of that. And the farm had gone bankrupt in 1989 and been sold off at auction. Hughes bought the wreckage and put it back together. Then, in September of 2020, at 87 years old, he finally got the thing he'd been chasing his entire life, because his horse Authentic won the Kentucky Derby, Spendthrift's first Derby since the 70s. 11 months later, Wayne Hughes died at the farm with his family around him, and his daughter and her husband have run it ever since. Every family we've covered so far bought their way into Kentucky. The family at number 1 has been here since 1870. They're worth roughly double what she is, and they've spent a century and a half building something far more valuable than a horse farm. Number 1. The Brown family. 113 trusts. That's the number, and I want you to hold on to it because it's the whole story. The Brown family are the richest family in Kentucky by an enormous margin. Forbes has put them north of $16 billion, and they own Brown-Forman, which is one of those companies you have absolutely heard of without ever knowing the name. They make Jack Daniels. They make Woodford Reserve, the official bourbon of the Kentucky Derby. They make Old Forester and Herradura tequila, and about 25 other brands sold in 160 countries. It started in 1870 when a pharmaceutical salesman named George Garvin Brown scraped together $5,500 in savings and borrowed money and started bottling whiskey in Louisville. Now here is the part almost nobody knows, and it is genuinely one of the most impressive pieces of engineering in American business. The Brown family owns roughly half of Brown-Forman on paper, but they control 67% of the voting shares, which means they can be outnumbered and it doesn't matter because they can never be outvoted. And they hold that control through 113 separate trusts, partnerships, and limited liability companies, at least 18 of which are dynasty trusts built specifically to minimize inheritance tax, so that no Brown, ever, in any generation, gets forced to sell a share of the company just to pay a tax bill. Some of them are registered in Delaware. And that number, 113, that's only what the SEC legally forces them to disclose. Plenty of Browns hold stakes too small to require any public filing at all, which means the real number is higher and nobody outside that family has any idea what it is. So think about what they've actually built. Around 30% of family businesses survive into the second generation. 12% make it to the third. 3% make it to the fourth. Brown-Forman is now in its fifth, chaired by Campbell Brown, who started as an intern in the company mailroom in 1985, and at 1.6 Browns sat on the board at the same time. Compare that to the Binghams back at number 8, who had a comparable empire and sold every last piece of it to strangers rather than sit in a room and work it out. The Browns looked at that exact problem a century ago and solved it with paperwork. They didn't just build a fortune. They built a legal machine designed so that no future Brown, however greedy or foolish or furious, could ever break the thing apart. And it has worked for 156 years. And those were the 8 richest families that own Kentucky. Notice what nearly all of them did, though. Oil money, coal money, cigarette money, storage unit money, it doesn't matter where it came from, because the second it got big enough, every single one of them went out and bought horses. In this state, land and bloodlines are how you actually buy your way in, and they all knew it. But the Browns are the exception. They never needed the land because they bought the paperwork instead. Anyway, which one of these empires got you? The newspaper dynasty that started with an exhumed body, the man who made $1 billion on cigarettes he's never smoked, or the family hiding a whiskey empire inside 113 trusts? Drop it in the comments, hit that like button if any of this moved you, and subscribe to Global Status, because we break down empires like this every single week.